Hi, everyone. My name is Garrett Stanwyck. I'm VP of Operations at Within Health, and I'll be your host for today's session. I'm honored to introduce you to our moderator and panelists today. We'll be discussing the value of podcasting for medical professionals. Our moderator today is Katie Peel. Katie is a primary therapist at Within Health. She's been specializing in treating eating disorder patients over the last 4 years. Her integrative approach is rooted in evidence-based psychodynamic cognitive behavioral theories to help clients increase insight and awareness while supporting healing and change. The first panelist is Karen Lewis. Karen is a specially trained eating disorder therapist that has been practicing in the field since 2005. Karen's treatment approach is grounded in the humanistic and relational model while incorporating CBT and DBT when appropriate. She also takes a collaborative team approach by working with dietitians, recovery coaches, and psychiatrists to ensure clients are receiving the best care possible. She's also a podcast host of Recovery Bites. Our second panelist is Dr. Jeffrey DeSarbo. Dr. DeSarbo is a physician, psychiatrist, and medical director of ED 180 Eating Disorder Treatment Programs in Garden City, New York. His special interest is with the bioneurological correlation of eating disorders and mental health disorders and translating the published scientific research into information that treatment providers, patients, and families can use to improve treatment and recovery. Our final panelist is Beth Harrell. Beth is a master's level registered dietitian nutritionist, a certified intuitive eating counselor, and a certified eating disorder specialist. She specializes in creating positive connections with food, weight, eating, and body. She works from a health at every size perspectives and enjoys helping her clients nourish their mind, body, and soul. If you have questions throughout the panel today, please go ahead and leave them in the chat box, and we'll do our best to try to address them at the end of the session. And with that said, I'll pass it over to you, Katie.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to see all of you and all of our fabulous panelists. I thought today we could do sort of a kind of a roundtable open discussion, just to really get to know all of our fabulous podcasters. Besides being, dietitians, therapists, and psychiatrists, they all talk for a living. So I thought, what better than to get the conversation started. So just to throw out an idea to begin with, I'd love to just hear your takes on why you feel podcasting is an effective medium for medical professionals and how it sort of works to engage clients, patients, and people who are just interested in the subject.
Are we going to go in any particular order?
Jump in, hot potato.
Well, I personally, I think the thing with podcasting and getting any of information out as it comes about, it works well for podcasting because it's readily accessible to both medical professionals, clinicians, lay people, so they have access to it. Whereas prior to really having this venue, a lot of the types of information, let's say, that I'm interested in research studies or studies on anything that's coming out with new information on eating disorders, you had to read the journals. And oftentimes people don't even have access to these journals, or they're difficult to understand when you read these journals. So it makes access to the information that I think we need readily available. And unlike just reading articles in a journal, there's usually with the podcast and other social media types of interactions, there's feedback and there's explanations and there's discussions. So it really takes the old sources of receiving information, and it kind of just brings it in, it makes it like three-dimensional, that we can not only learn from it, but we also can have discussions around it. We can talk about people's, we can apply real life case studies and examples to it. So I think, this type of form of communication, not to mention the convenience that you listen to it on your way into work or in the car or on an airplane or anywhere, helps tremendously. So that's my take on the tremendous benefit that things like podcasts offers. So
it also gives access to, if looking at one topic, which we're looking at eating disorders, but there's so many aspects to eating disorders. And so, for my podcast, I have guests on from literally like all walks of life. I have clinicians, everybody's either recovered or has been involved with somebody who's had an eating disorder. So I've had activists on, I've had parents on who have lost children, I've had dietitians, recovery coaches. So in one swoop, you can one catalog, you can notice something about, I want to hear about eating disorders and trauma. Somebody's done a podcast about that. I want to hear about eating disorders and psychedelics. I've had Adele LaFrance on to talk about that. I want to hear about men and eating disorders. That's been, so it actually also puts everything in a very convenient, neat package. And then you get to choose what you're ready for. I've had some parents say, I'm not ready to listen to any of the authors that wrote books about losing a child. And I say, absolutely not. When you're ready, it's there.
Yeah. I love this whole medical therapy, nutrition, collaborative in this session right now, Katie. So I'm grateful to be involved in this. And when it's a medical podcasting, I was wondering, doctors don't have a lot of time. None of us do if we are really invested in our work. And so that driving to work kind of thing is super helpful. Mine is the seasoned RD, and I have a medical series. So mine's designed for professionals. And the seasoned RD is the ED is capitalized for eating disorders. And we all come to this field with different levels of seasoning. So I have a lot of years of experience, and I don't even feel like I've scratched the surface of what there is to know in this area. So I invite in for my medical series, I have a medical co-host who's newer to the field and asks those questions of the higher seasoned or different seasoning levels professionals. And then my co-host on a regular basis is a fairly new dietitian. So she asks those questions. And my guests are professionals in the field, either that or students preparing to move into the field.
So exciting. It really sounds like podcasting for everyone on this panel has become a really dynamic way to connect with other professionals and lay people, and really help to educate and further understanding in a lot of different aspects of treatment, and a lot of different ways to think and know about eating disorders. So in your experiences, what types of content and topics seem to be like most interesting? Is there anything that each of you is sort of lit up by? Is there a difference between that and what your audiences seem to really grasp?
Well, for mine, mine is my special interest again is in the neuroscience and neurobiology. And when I started it, and it's also based on a book that I'm working on, which will be also called Translating Ed. So it really takes these complicated research studies that are out there that I think is very important for people to know and understand. And I try to translate that down into easy to understand points and findings that are out there, and try to relate that to how that affects the individual, like how their own brain and central nervous system function with these findings, and for clinicians, how these types of findings can actually help guide them in their approach to treating a patient clinically. On the other, there's a whole other side when I think about these questions that you ask, because then there's always, what do I talk about and present, and what do I enjoy listening to? And it's like you said, I enjoy these other podcasts where I'm hearing from the different disciplines and clinicians and their intake and their views. And I also, while I don't do a lot of it, but there are tremendous podcasts that do. I know as popularity goes, people who are working on recovery like nothing better than to hear from people who have gone through that recovery. And, oftentimes they take more from that than they do from the clinicians. And so I always enjoy listening to people's experiences as they've gone through their recovery. And I think a lot of people out there that struggle want to hear that too. And it offers the hope that I can get there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's really the basis of Recovery Bites, is all conversations about getting to and staying recovered. And how, one of the reasons why I started the podcast is I used to have, it was for two reasons. I'd have clients that would come into my office and say, I've been told that full recovery is not possible, which breaks my heart as a fully recovered person and as someone who's been in the field for so long. And I don't know if I'd be able to do the work if I didn't know it was a possibility. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to recover, but it's a possibility. So that was something that I thought, oh, no, I got to get that message out there. And the other is that I've had clients come in and say, I feel like I failed at recovery. I have been told that recovery is possible, and I was told that my life was going to be perfect once I recovered. And that's an unfair statement to say to people, because it's absolutely not true. We all go through life challenges, but now you learn how to navigate through it. And so that's why I love telling stories about recovery, being recovered, having people on that have gone through the process, clinicians who have worked with clients from chronic to disordered eating, all ends of the spectrum. It doesn't matter where you lie on the spectrum. Everybody is deserving of this treatment. So even though guests talk about different things, it all goes back to recovery is hard, worth it, and possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And people can just consume that whenever, whether it's, and although my podcast is designed for professionals, there are definitely consumers who listen to it and then can get connected with people who they connect with online. When you ask Katie, what the listeners like on, it's neurobiology was one of our biggest downloaded episodes. And the dietitian we are very well trained in medical nutrition therapy. So we're right in between medical and therapy. And it's designed for the dietitian, but all professionals, like you said, Dr. DeSarbo, listening to all the different professionals. I think that's what our listeners like is that variety and the collaborative approach.
Wonderful.
Excuse me, I'm freezing here in the mountains. I just have to.
And I put myself on because I heard a truck go by the back of my office. So
I throw out my coat. So
Well, you did just get back from the mountains, so you're
a little used to it.
right.
And that's one of the icebreaker questions on mine is, do you like mountains or beaches? So that's it. I was glad to have this option for the background.
Oh, nice.
So are you a mountains person then, Beth?
I am, but my co-host is a beaches person. So we came up with 3 icebreakers and that was one of them.
Excellent. So each one of you has been inspired to begin a podcast and to really, go fully in the direction of your various professions. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a why. If you would mind sharing a little bit about like what brought you to eating disorders and what brought you to sharing a podcast and what led you in the direction of your profession.
I mean, we don't have to keep going in the same cycle.
I know.
We're trying to respect each other while we're talkers.
I don't mind, but
You can go.
My story was, it really is because of COVID. When COVID started at the time, in addition to all the work I was doing in my private practice and program, I was a covering psychiatrist at one of the residential centers. And what I would do once a month is I would go in and speak on Family Day to the patients and the families. And I was giving, again, my angle with regards to the brain and how that ties into eating disorders. COVID hit and family weekends and stuff was shut down. And I had a patient and I would still present to the people who were part of in the residential program. And one girl just said, I really need my parents to hear this. Can you put it on YouTube or something? So my first step was, COVID's happening, we were all in this lockdown period. And I said, all right, I'll do that. Because I also just like getting the information out. And so I created a 15-part series on YouTube called it's a neuro series on the neurobiology of eating disorders. And there's under different topics. And so I could have just put a simple PowerPoint, but sometimes you get stuck, you overdo things. And that eventually evolved to me saying, all right, I should put these videos up, as part of a podcast, and maybe start doing something a little more periodically where I could give updates on the more recent research. And then COVID hit again, and I got slowed down by all of that. And we're hoping to get back to more full stream. But that's kind of how it happened to me. It really was COVID when it started in its early stages, and the seriousness of everything. And it really was a patient begging me to put something up online about the type of things that I would talk about. Of course, all along, I've always been listening to everybody else's podcasts. So, but that's my story. So,
Beth, let's shake it up. Why don't you go this time?
All right, let's shake it up. I like that. It's interesting you mentioned COVID. I was the certification director for the CEDS program, certified eating disorder specialist. And when I left that to dive more into the private practice that I have, I felt alone. I felt like I needed to connect with people. I was able to stay kind of on the cutting edge of the different faculty that were part of the core courses for certification. So what else do you do during a pandemic but start a podcast? And that was the thing, is the way to connect, and just paired with somebody who was new, just brand new to the field. And her questions are so great. And our listeners really like hearing all perspectives. That's how I started it.
I started actually a few months before the pandemic hit. And again, it was when these messages were coming, people were coming into my office and saying things like, I've been told full recovery is not possible, and, or my life should be perfect. And I also was very naive, and I thought, sure, I'll do a podcast, not realizing how much work goes into a podcast.
Ooh.
And so I will definitely say that, like, had I known ahead of time, I don't know if I would have thought I could do it. And I love sharing information. I love learning myself. I feel like I myself am so lucky, like I'm getting a second graduate degree because I'm having some of the most brilliant people on the show, and I'm having, like I said, activists and authors and theorists. And so some of it is just my own interest. And another part of it was just how alone I felt and my family felt when I had my eating disorder 30 years ago. And there was a lot of shame and a lot of judgment. And I know that my parents had, trouble finding support and asking questions. I thought, forgive me, I'm so sorry. I thought I was completely alone in my thoughts. And, I wish there was someone who just spoke to me when I was sitting by myself, and I could hear everything and know that I'm not alone in my thoughts. There's also a reason behind my thoughts. It's not just about my body. It's not just about food. It's about a whole host of other things. And it's okay. Like, mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of. We all struggle to some degree. And so I think I just did it for those reasons.
Yeah, wonderful. So it sounds like for each of you in a certain way, Karen, I know your podcast started a little bit before the pandemic, but it sounds like the podcast for each of you is a real connector.
Yeah.
Huge. How
does community play a role for each of you in your practices and in your podcast fame communities?
Well, and we just came out of the Within on community this morning, and that was a really great discussion of the importance, because Karen's talked about feeling alone, and those are professionals who are listeners of the podcast. We talk about feeling like we're on an island, and so it's a way for us to have conversations that are available freely to anyone. And it's a way of connecting. And it's also a way of connecting with potential clients and the two of you, Dr. DeSarbo and Karen, I didn't know about you. I knew of you, but now I get to meet you through this, and now I can listen to your podcast and hopefully have you on mine at some point. But like Karen said, it takes a lot of resources, of time, energy. Yeah.
I mean, I think community is everything, whether you're talking about the professional community or people that are struggling or their loved ones. And, you know, again, it goes back to, I felt so alone in my eating disorder. And then when I became an eating disorder professional, I felt this community. We were all talking about the same thing. We all had the same interest. And granted, I don't want somebody who's struggling with an eating disorder just to be thinking about eating disorders, but you create a community and it gives people a place to be. And yes, the professional community is unbelievable. And I can't believe the people that have offered to be on the podcast and the time that they've taken out of their schedules, because they want to share their message as well. And we talked about accessibility. Not everybody has accessibility to a clinician or a psychiatrist or a dietitian, or comorbidity, multiple things that people are struggling with. And so it creates community for everyone.
And for me too, I would say the experience has really grown my community, as far as even with professionally and with individuals, patients and families. You know, it's, for me, it's become more of an international reach that I've had, as far as, you know, I have a couple of groups I work really closely with in New Zealand, Australia, the Middle East, and parts of Europe, that they're like colleagues I don't think I ever would have had without access to podcasts and my YouTube. And, you know, it's great. Sometimes I'll get an email just saying how certain information has helped, or they're asking me for directions and, you know, who do I listen to next or something like that, you know. So it's always, you know, look, there is I like being able to, again, get the type of information out that I usually speak about. But there is this reward I think we all get from knowing, you know, we're doing just a little bit more to help people. You know, I mean, we're all doing it for that reason, you know. So is a podcast an ego thing? I don't think it is, as much as it just makes us feel good if we know we're helping.
Yeah.
You know? So.
Absolutely. I remember in my recovery, I had a very busy schedule, and it was before I was a therapist. And I found some recovery podcasts, and I would just keep those on, you know, 100% of the time where I had free time, because I needed the messaging to be consistent and to not have brain space for the eating disorder to continue to like fill my thoughts. And I just really cherish, you know, those podcasts that helped me towards my recovery, but also have such great respect for the sort of the work that the help that podcasts offer to people, you know, be it a therapist, a dietitian, a psychiatrist, others in recovery. You know, there's a reach that would not have been available, you know, pre-podcast times, right? Like, you know, during the good old radio days, you know, you couldn't program, right?
Yeah.
You could. I don't really know about anything technological. I'm of the era of like cassette tapes and the 8-track.
Exactly.
I just learned how to upload a background today.
Yeah, you did great under pressure.
I also want to say, and forgive me for interrupting, there's a lot of people that have a lot of things to say out there, and I want to give them the space and the platform to be able to do it. Like, I agree with what Jeff was saying. Like, it makes me feel good to be able to do it, but it also makes me feel good to bring someone on who has a really important message to tell. Or, you know, there's even younger clinicians who have a lot of wisdom, and it wouldn't be heard if we didn't give them that platform, because they have their own experience. And so it's also about giving others a place to share their wisdom, their experience, their values and passions about all of this.
Absolutely.
I always say when people ask me, how did I get into eating disorders? Being trained, going through medical school and residency, really my education came from working with my patients.
Yeah.
That was,
Yep.
and I think, again, when it comes to both clinicians who listen to podcasts or people out there, and I think we mentioned it is an education.
Yeah.
And when you hear, especially from people who have gone through the struggles and the ups and downs and what they do, and also to hear how do clinicians think, that's an education you can't get anywhere else. So
Right.
even if a physician wants to enter this field, right now, I would say one of the best things you can do is listen to podcasts from people who've been doing this.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that the idea behind the seasoned RD is that I consider myself like a cast iron skillet. You were talking, Katie, about the cassette tape. A cast iron skillet is something that has withstood the test of time, but then my co-host is like an Instapot or whatever. Everyone's perspectives matter. But when I took my board exam, it was paper and pencil.
Yeah.
And now they're doing it on computers, right? So, but that doesn't mean that I know more. We all have different perspectives, and so listening to both all perspectives really brings in that richness for whether it's a professional listening, a newer clinician, or even a client who is just trying to figure it out. They have the space to do it on their own time.
Absolutely. One of the things that I love most about podcasts, especially, listening to other clinicians, listening to people tell their recovery stories, is, when someone says something that like sparks a brain zooming, and you just get so excited about, I have a dog. It's so wonderful to hear something that makes you like reinterested or want to explore more in a certain direction. I think one wonderful thing about podcasts is this collective that we have, right? We can all, in a sense, collaborate and learn by listening to one another's work and listening to the guests, and how much that furthers us in our own professions, with being able to hear perspectives from, the newbies and the more seasoned.
And there's also new research coming out all the time, and there's new methods that are being taught, and it's such a convenient way to stay connected with what's advancing in the field, because we can't always attend conferences. And so I've had guests come on that are talking about advances that I wasn't aware of, and I've been doing this for 18 years, and I'm thinking, thank God I have you on my podcast. So now I know, other clinicians and dietitians and psychiatrists know, it's a really great way of getting advances out there, advances in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any new and fresh things that have been brightening any of your lives? Anything you want to share?
Tons. And that's the thing. I mean, for me, it's overwhelming how much is out there. And I remember a family therapist telling me years ago, why would you specialize in eating disorders? Isn't that going to get boring? And it's like, are you kidding me? There's nothing boring about it. So I'm in a process right now, and this will unfold in the spring, of doing my own diversity training, and working with different consultants. So I want to share that with my listeners in the spring. But I think for nutrition, it's really understanding, and this is very clear for Karen and Jeff. Supervision is required for therapists, psychologists. It's not for dietitians. But if you're going to be in the eating disorders world and practicing, it's keeping your clients. I will always have clients. They, like Jeff said, they just have taught me so much, and they inform everything that moves forward. So supervision for dietitians, I think, is the area that I really am most passionate about. I also teach a graduate elective course, and after watching Dr. DeSarbo yesterday in the Within Summit, I then looked at a couple of his YouTubes, and those are going to be assignments.
Yeah.
Students, heads up if you're listening.
And again, from what I try to do is almost every day is, and oftentimes, like when I gave a type of talk that I gave yesterday, and if I'm giving this to clinicians, people who see my slides, I always cite my sources, where the journals are, what they come from. And when people take an interest in this, I usually want to share with them that, like, it takes about 10 minutes of your day. If you go to, like, let's say PubMed or Medscape or something, and you just read you type in eating disorders, and you can type in anything after that. There's enough new and exciting information out there all the time that you can read 2-3 new abstracts a day.
Yeah.
Now, if you read that, you're going to read between 1,000 and 1,500 abstracts a year, okay, which takes 10 minutes a day. Can you kind of feel what your knowledge base will be when you just do that little bit of seeing what's new out there, So again, I go back to the journals a lot when I'm translating it, but I think you do the same thing with podcasts. Just, so if you're listening to some of these podcasts, you have access to this tremendous amount of information.
Yeah.
That's what I think. There's always this thing that happens with clients, patients, and families, is when they engage in this type of research on podcast or on their own, they often end up knowing more than their physician and their psychiatrist or a nutritionist. Like I said, I always say, you got to have a specialist whenever possible. An eating disorder is totally different from anything else.
Yeah.
They end up knowing more, and then they're working with a nutritionist who doesn't really get an eating disorder. They understand disordered eatings, and they're educating now the clinicians. But so I that's what I find, is that there's new and exciting stuff when you ask that question. Like, it's not like once in a while, every 6 months or something. To me, all the time there's new and exciting stuff. It's just how do we access, and again, podcasts and social media types of things, I think, is fantastic for that.
Yeah. I don't have anything more to add to what Beth and Jeff just said. I mean, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're in there doing the same work. We're educating clinicians with you. And that's where I think that just my humility in this podcast is what I've done wrong, what I think I've done wrong, how hard it is to have a new therapist who hangs their hat saying that maybe they do eating disorders, but they have a plethora of other things. And then what if the team doesn't agree? And I'm in that with you. The doctors, the primary care docs, and some of the fat phobia and weight stigma around atypical anorexia, for example. I'm educating the clinicians that I work with. I'm educating the clients to help them have a stronghold in that doctor's office or with the therapist or with their family, whatever it may be, but I'm doing it publicly so that everyone can learn with me.
Beautiful. Would love to pivot just for a moment to talk a little bit more about the business of podcasts and the business of podcasts in this particular, eating disorder industry. We touched a little bit on how we connect with the audiences and how community is created, but any thoughts on besides the time consuming nature of podcasts, what might you have to share with folks who are maybe thinking about starting their own podcast? What are some of the tips and tricks, if you will?
I haven't figured that out yet.
That's like, Speaking for myself, I mean, I feel like you have to be really passionate about it because, and again, speaking from my own experience, I read almost everything. So if I have an author on, I read their books. If I have someone on who's written books, like, I mean, I've read everything from like Jen Gaudiani and Adele LaFrance, like whoever's written a book, I read the book. And which is wonderful. It's wonderful for me. And it also makes me feel really comfortable when I sit down with somebody and the guest really appreciates that. They're like, wow, you're asking questions that actually relate to what I do. So I'm going to say preparation is invaluable. It is. And then I get very excited when I'm doing the interview, because I'm like going through the book. I'm like, then on page 22 you wrote, so it's exciting. And when there's activists that are on and you're reading some of their literature on the air, it's just that's my tip. Do a lot of work for each guest.
From the business perspective, all I say is, I just go to somebody who kind of does everything for me. Of course, the preparation, like you said, I have to do on my own, which it's kind of part of my day anyways. But I again, technology is not my area, as I think I demonstrated when I signed on here. But I would say for people who are thinking about a podcast, really, do you have a message? Do you have something you want to say? It's not. It's funny because it's difficult, but it's not. It's difficult, but almost anybody can do it. The thing that you don't want to get caught up on is, well, if I create a podcast, am I going to have thousands of listeners, hundreds? It doesn't matter. You can't care about that. It's like, you can have 1,000 people listen to a podcast that doesn't do much for themselves or society, or you could have 5 listeners and you affect the lives of 1 or 2 of those people. So if you have a message that you think people want to hear, then by all means do it. I'm not somebody who says, I don't know how to be a social influencer or something like that. It's a whole nother question. I wouldn't know how to tell anybody, I'm not even sure if that's the right reasons to create a podcast on things like this, but I would tell people if they have a message they think is worth sharing and people like to hear, just do it. Doesn't matter, like I said, if you have 5 people or 5,000 people.
I love that so much. I think that that's what keeps me going, is knowing that when people make comments or send me an email or reach out and say something, that those numbers, those are the numbers that matter.
Right.
It's the message that's getting across. This is so helpful. Thank you.
It reminds me of that story I think many of us may have heard of, little girls walking on the beach with thousands of starfish, picking one up, tossing it in, picking one. An old man comes and says, little girl, what are you doing? How can you possibly make a difference? There's thousands of them. And she picks up a starfish, throws it in the water and says, well, I made a difference for that one. And that's what I'm saying. You could have 1 listener, but if you impact that person in a positive way, you've done more than most people, So.
And now,
go ahead, Beth.
Oh no, I was going to say, because of now that Dr. DeSarbo is talking about this, then any other doctors who are coming in and doing the medical series or who are listening to that, I can then say, and now you have a connection with his work. And it might just be, that starfish or several starfish, but it grows.
Yeah. I do also want to say, though, that, and again, I feel so privileged with the people that have come on my show, on the podcast, that I don't care about the numbers in the sense of like, I'm the most popular, but I want everyone to hear it, and not because of me, because of the guest. Because I want a parent in, I don't know, somewhere in Asia to say, wait a minute, I didn't know there was such thing as family-based therapy. or I didn't know there was such thing as ARFID. So I actually do want to like just keep getting it out and getting it out and getting it out, because such incredible, and that's just the way my podcast is mine's very conversational. So it's always about the guest. It's never about me. I'm not that interesting. I mean, I think I am, but that's a whole nother show. But it's about the guests, right? And I want those guests to share their message as far and wide as they can.
So just to touch on that a little bit, Karen, how do you work to market and expand your audience? What does that look like from the therapist / host perspective?
How do I market it? Is that what you were just?
How do you market it? How do you grow your audience?
I literally, after 3 years of having the podcast, just hired a marketer. I really just did word of mouth. I first of all, I have a phenomenal producer, and she's always putting stuff up on Facebook for me and Instagram. I don't know how to do any of that, and I don't have any problem admitting it. It's just not where my strength is. So she gets it out. I also give a lot of talks, and I do, yeah. And then, like I said, I just hired a marketer for the first time, and it's also exciting. You know, I mean, I love being a therapist. I love it. I've been doing it for 18 years. And then there's also something really exciting about the business aspect of it, which is really fun to see something you're passionate about go out into the world. And so hiring a marketer was a big step for me, like emotionally and, you know, in my own career wise and whatnot. And so I'm learning as I go. That's it. I go every day. I wake up every day and I learn something new. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Beth, you had mentioned a bit about getting emails from, you know, a listener here and there and connecting that way and getting, I'm sure you've all had the experience of getting questions through, you know, Instagram or on YouTube or, you know, any of the platforms the kids are using these days. How do you feel about you know that sort of fine line of like, sometimes I'm sure people ask like specific questions to their own experience, and you know, as a clinician, that line between like giving clinical advice to an anonymous person who is very vulnerably showing and sharing of themselves to you, but also keeping that boundary so as not to, you know.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I do have that disclaimer of what this podcast is and what it is not. And it is a way to have your interest piqued in different modalities in the treatment of eating disorders, especially as a professional. It is not your own therapy. It's not your own, it's not a substitute for supervision as a specialist, and it is not a substitute for seeking professional help for your own needs. So I haven't had anyone reach out for that. I haven't had to draw the lines, but in supervision groups, because I'm not out there. I'm like, who said the kids, like the Instagrams and the TikToks, and I have students who say, we're going to get you on TikTok, and I'm like, that's going to be a cold day anywhere before I'm on TikTok. But I mean, the bottom line is I am ignorant when it comes to DMs and all of that. Oh, you've got a few new followers. Okay, I need to do that. And so the marketing piece, I would have to hire if I wanted to continue to do that. But in groups where dietitians meet up, sometimes they will throw out a de-identified case and sometimes not de-identified. So there's a red flag right there. It's like, hey, get into supervision with someone, get into consultation. This is people's livelihoods. This is they're just one step away from you knowing who this person is and ruining things. So just take this offline and get into consultation with a specialist.
Great. Dr. DeSauber, Karen, do you have any experiences or wisdom to share with sort of the professional connecting with the layperson or the listener, and how that sort of like how you manage those questions and connections?
Well, for me, I have to be very careful because, when you get worried about, well, if I give certain advice, is it dispensing medical advice? And because I'm a physician, yeah, it is almost, sometimes if it's like, have a good day, I worry, did I just dispense medical advice? Or I'm going to be sued for putting pressure on someone,
Yeah.
So usually, I find I do get some inquiries like that, and I'm pretty clear in saying, listen, I really have to know and understand. This isn't something I can give guidance towards. My advice usually ends up being like, again, you need a consultation with a professional who specializes if possible, and sometimes I might provide resources. If you're looking for people, you can check out these websites or, but like even when someone's looking for a therapist, I'm always saying try it. A lot of people, both therapists, psychiatrists, nutritionists will say, yeah, I work with eating disorders, but I'm usually saying like, well, are they members of the societies? Do they have specialized training? You got to do that. So I'll give advice of what they might need to find a qualified person to help them with their individual issue. But I have to tread extra carefully. And the truth is, even if I have an idea of what might help, I can't dispense that. There's so.
Yeah.
I love that. Have a good day comment.
Yeah.
Because like I have heard that, and you have to triple think about like, did I just trigger someone because I just told them have a good day, and what if they can't? What if they
Right.
Anyway?
Yeah. I also never say anything is an absolute truth or this is the actual way of doing it. I always say, something that's worked for me or something that has worked with a client in the past. And so I'm very, very cautious of never saying anything definitive. And I say it frequently in every episode, like, I don't mean to be making a blanket statement. I want to be very clear. I'm talking about this one particular situation. And so there's a lot of that.
Yeah, fabulous. I find that I mean, not that I have a podcast, but when I speak to others who do, it's and therapists who have online or social media presences, I always find it interesting what that gray area is of wanting to connect, because that's how you grow an audience, or part of how you grow an audience, wanting to connect because we are all in a business of connecting with other human beings. I mean, what is recovery but for connection, and so like how we all navigate sort of that, online clinician presence versus how we behave in our professional lives, versus how we behave in our personal lives, and what sort of like piece of your own personality do you bring to your public facing work. Just always very interesting. So fabulous panel. We're in our last sort of 10 minutes, and I want to make sure that each of you gets a chance to sort of say anything important that you feel you might not have had a platform to share. If we haven't covered something you really want to talk about, if there are any pieces of your own podcasts that stand out for you, or of your professional histories that you want to share about.
It's so funny, when we first got on, we were trying to make sure to not talk over each other, because we all do talking for this particular thing. I think that probably the thing that I would like to learn, and that Karen had made a comment, is the passion. The passion is there. That's what got us all to do this. Is keeping it going. So mine is weekly right now, and that feels like a whole lot. So it's taking a look at that business piece and knowing that my list is 100 and something long of people who I meet, who I want to have on, who I want to have their perspective. And how can I do that? I'm one and I'm only one. And so the timing of that, I think that's a big piece of it. There's a ton of content in there, a ton of connection. Like that's what it will be everlasting. If I said today, I can't do this anymore, just because of the sheer amount of time, it's always going to be there. It's kind of my book. Like Jeff said, he's got one coming out, but I haven't written it down. Mine's verbal.
How many hours a week do you put into your podcast?
I was thinking about that actually coming into this, because Wednesdays are my day where my producer, and he's wonderful, will have the next episode ready. He's pulled out some sound bites for the kind of the teaser that kind of impacted him. And then I choose up from amongst those. Anyways, it's for every 35 to 45 minute episode, it's planning a time, getting people in, interviewing them, listening through it again to do the show notes. I'm going to say for every 35 to 45 minute episode, it's an additional 3 to 4 hours. And that's time. That's time is also time that I'm not doing other things.
Right.
Yeah. I'm going to say at least 4 hours a week, but that's just my part. Like, I don't do any, like I said, I have a producer. I don't do any of the editing. I don't do any of the promoting. And so it's time consuming. I mean, I love doing it. It brings joy, value, passion, connection, everything to me. It brings so much to me. And it's time consuming. It's a lot. And I hate to bring it down to a financial piece, but it's also, it's not inexpensive too. I mean, like I lose hours seeing clients. I pay my producer. I pay for marketing. This started as a passion project and is now turning into something bigger than I had ever imagined on so many levels, which is exciting. And it's a lot. It's a lot.
I am the least seasoned here. Where I go long periods of time with no hours because of practice and obligations and everything. And mine is less, like I said, it's usually when I'm putting something up, it's for a reason. And I got delayed with my podcast after my initial couple of episodes because of COVID and getting restarted and everything. So I'm the type that I can go months without doing anything and then have an idea of what I want to do and then spend 25 hours in the course of a week, getting exactly what I want together. So, which is not a model I would recommend anybody follow. But again, it's something that I do in addition to what I first and foremost do. So, and it has to be that way, just out of necessity, and again, we all have difficult lives. And again, I always sometimes wish people could walk a mile in my shoes, it's like trying to return calls and everything, so it's something for me that if there's something like I actually created a screening tool scale for body image assessment. I don't know if anyone's seen that. And I love this scale. And again, for me, it was like, so how do I get this out there? And I have no interest in trademarking or copy. I just want people to use it. Okay. Right. So I put it on my YouTube channel, And I said, I should put a podcast after a while when I have some people who've used it. I haven't gotten to that point because, I just put this out rather recently. It's called the BIS scale. So it's funny because that's the only one where I had to struggle to figure out how can I record myself on my computer explaining the scale, which is relatively simple. And then I just put it on my YouTube, and I hope
I love it.
Yeah.
So,
and now it's available to all of us. So now that I know about
yeah,
it,
it said
too,
copy
yeah.
free. It's like, and it's a screening tool. But I really think if people see this, it's a great tool to use in private practice and clinical settings or programs, and it's. So like I said, my approach is different. I'm really the novice person here, and I just hire somebody to produce. Like I wouldn't even say produce it, just do the editing and recording and stuff. What is unique is the couple episodes we've done. I do it with my son. He is a therapist who also specializes in eating disorders. So you have a father-son podcast, two men.
Just got chills.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And my ultimate thing is I got to just let him take over the podcast as far as managing it and everything. But so it's also warm for me to be doing it with my son, and the fact that he found his way into this field just because he was always around me, and it's funny, everybody says he's a mini me. Like if we blacked out my photo and he talked, it's almost the same voice, laugh, everything. So
I love it.
But yeah, so I would take advice from the experts, and I'm the novice on this. So.
Garrett, you have reappeared. Welcome back.
Welcome back. It's been lovely listening to you guys talk. We're nearing the end of the session, so if anybody has any questions, you can drop them in the Q&A chat. We'll wait a couple moments to see if there are any questions for any of our attendees. If not, I encourage everyone to take a nice lunch break. We have 2 sessions coming up at 2:15 Eastern time. First one's the Power of Becoming the Advocate You Needed with William Hornby. And we have our CE session covering the intersection of pandemic, social media, epigenetics, and eating disorders. So if you do have any questions, please let us know. I would like to extend a warm thank you to our panelists and our host, Katie, our panelists, Karen, Beth, and Dr. DeSarbo. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're super appreciative of you and everything you do.
Thank you for the invitation.
And next time, if we can do this inside, I think that would be a lot better.
You got it. I know we will have to give you a fur coat because I know you've been thank you, everybody. Looks like we don't have any questions for now, so appreciate everyone.
Some comments. That's awesome. Thank you for the comments. You can see those.
Wonderful.
Thank you, and thank you to Within as well. So
Yeah,
very much so.
I hope everyone has a great rest of the summit and rest of the week. Thank you so much.
thank you.
bye everyone. Thank you.